Good afternoon, Bob Carlisle here, President of Concrete Fastening Systems, and today we're going to be talking about wedge anchor embedment depths. Now, each diameter of wedge anchor has a different minimum embedment. First of all, a wedge anchor. This is a wedge anchor. It's got threads on one end, it's got a clip on the other end, and then you have a nut and washer. Each diameter of wedge anchor has a different embedment depth that it needs to be embedded in the concrete to meet minimum holding values. Now, for example, a 1/4 inch diameter wedge anchor has a minimum embedment depth of 1.125", and then the larger the diameter, the more embedment it needs to hit minimum embedment depth and minimum holding values, all the way up to like an 1.25" wedge anchor that has a minimum embedment depth of 5.5 inches. Now, the deeper you embed one of these wedge anchors into the concrete, the higher the holding values. For example, a 1/2 inch wedge anchor embedded in the concrete 2.25 inches, which is the minimum embedment for a 1/2 inch anchor, will give you about 4,000 pounds of pullout. That same anchor installed in the same concrete at 4 inches will give you about 6,300 pounds of pullout value, quite a bit more holding values. Now, the values I just gave you are ultimate values, and what you need to do when you're calculating for holding values is be sure that you know what values you're looking for, because you want to plan on a safe working load. You want to use safe working load numbers for your planning purposes. And to get that, you would take the ultimate value and divide it by 4, or 25% of the ultimate value will give you the safe working load for that anchor. Now, the deeper you embed the anchor, it does not affect the shear value of the wedge anchor once minimum embedment depth has been reached. So if you embed the anchor 2.25 inches, in the case of a 1/2 inch wedge anchor, the shear value is a certain amount. The deeper that anchor goes, it's going to be the same amount, because that's the shear value. So the shear value is not affected by the embedment depth. Now, going deeper and deeper into the hole can create a couple problems. The anchor needs to be installed so that it's a minimum of 1.5 times the diameter from the bottom of the concrete, or the bottom of the unsupported edge of the concrete. So in our example of a 1/2 inch wedge anchor, that would be 3/4 of an inch. So that anchor needs to be embedded at a minimum of 3/4 of an inch away from the bottom of the concrete. So if the concrete is 3 inches deep, you can't go more than 2.25 inches into the concrete to keep it away from that unsupported edge. The other thing we run into is people trying to install anchors much deeper than minimum embedment. A wedge anchor of this length, 10-inch wedge anchor for example, is not embedded in the concrete 10 inches. What this anchor is designed for is to be embedded in the concrete minimum of 2.25 inches, but you can get it into 3, 4, maybe 4.5 inches, and then space for the nut and washer. The space in between is for the thickness of the material you're fastening. So the length of these long anchors are designed for accommodating different thicknesses of material that you're fastening down. But if you were to try to take this anchor and install it 10 inches in the concrete, you run into a problem. That is drilling the hole perfectly straight in the concrete. You get the hole drilled, and then you start hammering this anchor into the concrete, and the anchor will hit the wall, the side wall of the concrete, and bottom out, and you can't get the anchor to go in, and you can't get it to come back out. So it's very important that you don't do that, because that can create all sorts of problems for you during the installation process. Now, the other thing is that if you're when installing the wedge anchor, you don't want to get too, or when you're getting it down to the minimum embedment, when you're installing the wedge anchor to minimum embedment depth, you need to drill the hole deeper so that the anchor can start out, like a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch deeper than minimum embedment, because these anchors, as you install them, you turn the nut, it pulls the anchor up. So if you're trying to embed this at 2.25 inches, put the anchor in 2.25 inches and then set it, it's only going to be set at maybe 2 inches of embedment, so you're not going to be at minimum embedment. So the anchor, when you're installing it, needs to be installed in the concrete deeper to start with. Turning the nut, that pulls it up. And that's all there is about wedge anchor embedment depth. If you need to order wedge anchors, you can go on our website at www.confast.com.